Every Tuesday around 2 p.m., Frank leaves a small room at the veteran's home. He doesn't drive, and no one comes to pick him up, but that's fine with him. All he needs is his old wheelchair and a pair of steady hands. He wheels himself slowly down the long hallway, down the gentle ramp outside the front porch, and heads out toward the street that leads to Miller's Grocery, a place he visits so often people barely notice him anymore. Frank is 78, thin, slightly hunched, with a quiet presence. His white hair stays hidden under a black cap, embroidered in gold with the words, Vietnam Veteran. That hat has been with him for years. He doesn't wear it to stand out or beg for sympathy. To Frank, it's a reminder of where he's been, of the brothers he served with, and of the memories that still haunt him, even after all these years. He did 2 tours in Vietnam, stationed in the Central Highlands during the most violent years of the war. He saw things no man should have to see, heard the screams of wounded comrades, watched the fear in their eyes as helicopters lifted them out of hot zones. Frank came home not at parades or medals, but with a wound in his leg that never fully healed. For a while, he limped. Later, the leg grew weaker. Now he uses a wheelchair. But the real pain isn't in his body, it's in the dreams. The kind that wake him up at 2 a.m. in a sweat, gasping, heart pounding. He never talks about those dreams. Never liked to complain. His late wife, Ellen, was the only person he ever truly opened up to. They were married 45 years. Not a flashy life, but one filled with quiet love and steadfast loyalty. Ellen passed in 2009 after a long battle with cancer. Since then, Frank has been alone. They had 3 kids, 2 sons and a daughter, all grown, with families of their own, scattered across different states. The phone calls became less frequent over time. Frank doesn't hold it against them. He understands. Life moves on. People get busy. Still, when the phone sits silent on Thanksgiving or his birthday, he can't help but feel a quiet sting in his chest. At the veteran's home, they take good care of him. Clean rooms, polite staff, but no one really talks for long. And so, Frank gives himself a mission every week. On Tuesdays, he wheels down to Miller's Grocery. Not because he needs much, maybe just a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, or a few cans of soup. But the trip gives him something vital, a sense of purpose, a reason to get outside, to feel like he still belongs in the world. Folks in town know who he is. They've seen him countless times, rolling down the east sidewalk in that faded navy jacket, under his veteran cap. Some nod, a few say hi, but most people pass him like part of the scenery. Not out of malice. They're just used to him, to the quiet old man in the chair, to the gentle rhythm of his wheels on concrete. Frank doesn't mind. He doesn't need anyone to salute him or say thank you. He just wants to keep moving, to keep showing up. Miller's has become a kind of ritual, a place where he feels a little more human. Then came that Tuesday. The sky was clear. The air held the early warmth of spring. Frank wore a lighter coat that day. He rolled past the park, where kids played near the fountain. Across the street, old men read newspapers outside the coffee shop. And just ahead stood Miller's, with its wide windows and automatic doors. He was halfway through the parking lot when it happened. A gray SUV sped in too fast, screeching to a stop just behind him. The driver, a young man in his 20s, tall, wearing a hoodie and headphones, leaned out the window and glared at Frank like he was in the way. Frank turned his head and gave a small wave, a silent apology, though he hadn't done anything wrong. The young man shook his head and jerked the wheel, swerving around Frank aggressively. No words, no real confrontation, just tension in the air. Frank let out a quiet sigh and kept rolling forward, trying not to dwell on it. But moments later, they met again, this time at the front entrance. Frank was pushing the door open when the young man rushed up from behind, bumping the wheelchair hard. One of the armrests rattled, and Frank nearly lost his balance. If he hadn't grabbed the wheel quickly, he might have tipped over. He looked up, startled. The young man didn't apologize. Instead, he muttered something, maybe a curse, and walked past like Frank wasn't even there. No one in the parking lot seemed to notice. No one stepped in. Frank watched him disappear into the store. Then, quietly, he pushed the door the rest of the way and continued inside, not saying a word. He didn't want trouble. Never had. But someone had seen what happened. Someone Frank didn't know. And that person, just seconds later, did something no one expected. That afternoon was heavy with clouds. The kind of dull, gray light that hangs in the air when the sky can't make up its mind, whether pour rain or just sit there being miserable. Frank rolled his wheelchair slowly toward the sliding doors of Miller's Market. Same as every Tuesday. He always came around 2 in the afternoon, a small habit that helped him keep a rhythm in life. He wore his old navy blue jacket, a pair of jeans that hung a little loose, and a black cap embroidered in gold. Vietnam veteran. Everyone in town was used to that sight by now. A thin, quiet old man, always alone. But he never complained. Not once. Frank adjusted the wheels carefully. He knew the entrance mat could catch them if he wasn't careful. He was almost at the door when, out of nowhere, a tall young man strode past. Fast. Headphones in, phone in hand. Didn't look. Didn't slow down. And then he bumped into Frank. It wasn't a brutal hit, but it wasn't gentle either. The chair jolted. Frank's hand slammed against the wheel. He steadied himself. He didn't fall, but something about it cut deeper than the scrape. The indifference. No apology. No glance back. The young man just kept walking, like Frank was nothing more than a piece of furniture. It stung. Not the physical pain, but the coldness of being unseen. Frank had once served his country, stared down gunfire, watched brothers fall beside him. And now here he was brushed aside like a forgotten object. A woman nearby gasped. A few others turned their heads. But no one stepped forward. Not yet. Then someone did. A man in his late 40s or early 50s, wearing scuffed work boots, callous hands from years of labor. He wasn't a cop, not military, just a regular man. But he had seen what happened, and he wasn't about to let it slide. He walked straight toward the young guy. His voice rang out, clear, calm, but firm enough to silence the whole entrance area. "Hey, do you even realize what you just did?" The young man paused, took out one earbud, clearly annoyed. "What?" "I didn't do anything." The older man stood his ground. He pointed back toward Frank. "You shoved a veteran, a man who gave for this country you're living comfortably in. The least you can do is apologize." Silence fell over the area. Frank sat still, eyes down, hands gripping the wheel. He wasn't used to being defended, not in a long time. The young man looked around. There were eyes on him now, watching, waiting. He hesitated, a flicker of something, maybe guilt, crossed his face. "I didn't mean to," he mumbled, then turned and walked a few steps toward Frank. Awkwardly, he stopped and said, "Sorry, sir. I wasn't paying attention." Frank looked up. Those worn, tired eyes seemed to brighten just a little. He nodded, said nothing. He didn't need to. Sometimes a simple acknowledgement, a little respect, is enough to soothe a wound without a name. The man in the boots nodded in quiet satisfaction. He turned and walked away. No applause. No thanks. He didn't need either. Doing the right thing was its own reward. Some of the people nearby started whispering to each other. An elderly woman shook her head and said, "Kids these days, they've forgotten the meaning of sacrifice." A young father leaned down to his son and said, "That's why we have to remember. That's why we teach respect." Frank stayed there a few moments before rolling inside. His hand still throbbed, but his heart felt lighter. Not because of the young man's apology, but because someone he didn't even know, had stood up when it mattered. That Tuesday didn't end like every other Tuesday. It left something behind. A reminder. A quiet echo in the middle of an ordinary day. That sometimes a single act, a few honest words, can bring dignity back to someone the world forgot. The stranger stood firmly between the young man and Frank's wheelchair. His presence alone seemed to calm the restless air around them. He didn't shout. He didn't use harsh words. Instead, he spoke calmly but with undeniable authority. "That man you just pushed," he said slowly, "he wears that hat for a reason. Do you even know what that hat means?" The young man reluctantly pulled out one earbud, a faint smirk on his face. "What, this guy?" he scoffed, glancing at Frank. "He's just old." The stranger didn't flinch. He held the young man's gaze steadily and said, "That old guy watched his comrades die, so you could walk through life the way you do now. You think you're tough? Try crawling through muddy fields while bullets fly past your head." Around them, the parking lot grew quiet. Even the sliding doors of the store seemed to pause, holding their breath. A soft whisper came from someone nearby. "That's Frank. He was in my dad's unit." The young man looked around, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Phones were quietly pulled out. Eyes were fixed on him. The weight of the moment grew heavier by the second. The stranger crouched down beside Frank's wheelchair. His voice rose, clear and loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sir," he said respectfully, "I'm sorry. You deserve better than that. Thank you for everything you sacrificed." Then, turning back to the young man, his tone sharpened with resolve. "If you want to be a man," he said, "then start by acting like one. Say sorry." For the first time, the young man's bravado faltered. His eyes dropped and he muttered awkwardly, barely audible at first, "I'm sorry, sir." Frank nodded slowly. The years of weariness softened just a little by that apology. He didn't say much. A small smile was enough. The stranger stood, gently pushed Frank's wheelchair toward the entrance, and as they moved, a few people began to clap, softly, respectfully. Not a loud applause, but just enough for Frank to know he was seen, respected, and honored. That day, Frank felt a quiet dignity return. It wasn't just the apology or the clapping. It was the recognition, the simple but powerful acknowledgement from a stranger who stood up for what was right. And for the young man, that moment was a lesson, a moment that challenged him to understand respect, sacrifice, and the cost of freedom. That afternoon wasn't just another trip to the store. It became a reminder, a story passed quietly among those who witnessed it, about what it means to honor those who gave so much for others to live free. Sometimes it only takes a single moment, one clear voice standing up for respect, to remind us what honor really means. So, the next time you see someone in a wheelchair, wearing a cap that carries stories and sacrifices, take a moment, stop, look, and say thank you, because heroes never stop serving. Their legacy lives on quietly, in every act of kindness and respect we show. And sometimes it's strangers, ordinary people, who remind us what it truly means to be American. If you appreciate stories like this, stories that honor those who serve and remind us of the values we hold dear, please subscribe to Old Soldier Story. Join us as we share a moment of courage, respect, and humanity, because every story matters,